The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. The shepherds went in haste to Bethlehem and found Mary and Joseph and the infant lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known the message that had been told them about this child. All who heard it were amazed by what had been told them by the shepherds. And Mary kept all these things, reflecting on them in her heart. Then the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all that they had heard and seen, just as it had been told to them. When 8 days were completed for his circumcision, he was named Jesus, the name given him by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas. Yes, indeed, absolutely. The solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God. You know, we think about who Jesus is. I don't know how much time you've ever spent thinking about this question. Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? Saint Hippolytus, reflecting on this question, who is Jesus? And I'm going to paraphrase some of what his reflection was. We know that by taking a body from the Virgin, he refashioned our fallen nature. We know that his manhood was as the same clay or the same dust as ours. Remember, we're the dust of the earth that God breathed his life into. We remember that his manhood was as the same dust as our own. If it were not, he could hardly have been a teacher who could expect to be imitated. In other words, if Jesus is going to expect us to imitate him, he has to have something very, very much in common with us, doesn't he? If he were a different substance from me, he surely would not have ordered me to do as he did, to follow him, to take up his cross, to live as he did. But didn't he command us to do those things? And so he has this same substance as us. I know that by my nature I am very weak, and such a command from God could not be reconciled with his goodness and justice unless it were possible for us to follow Jesus. He wanted us to consider him as no different from ourselves. So he worked. He was hungry. He was thirsty. He was tired. He slept. Without protest, he endured his passion. He submitted even to death. In all these ways, he offered his life, his manhood, his flesh as the first fruits of our race, to keep us from losing heart when suffering comes our way. So I asked the question at the very beginning of the homily, who is Jesus? Have you thought much about that question? Who is he? And Saint Hippolytus answers that Jesus is very much like us. He has the weakness of our flesh. And if he did not, how could he expect us to follow him if he didn't know that? But who else is Jesus? And this is where we get to today's feast day, because we celebrate today as Mary, the mother of what? The mother of God. So Jesus is both our flesh and he is one with the Father. God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, one in being, or consubstantial with the Father. Who was Jesus in the womb of Mary? Both God and man. And so Mary is truly the mother of God. And this feast day, we reflect on who Jesus is and the great dignity that Jesus gave, that our God gave to Mary to be his mother. The church declares that Jesus, from his conception in Mary's womb, fully human and fully divine. Now, let's take a moment and step back into the gospel for just a second and imagine where Jesus and Mary and Joseph are when the shepherds come. Where are they? They're in the cave, right? Or they're in the barn, the main, whatever, however you imagine that. I've had the privilege of going to Bethlehem and seeing this complex of caves where they very much believe this is where Jesus was born. And so this is where the animals would have been stored. This is where our Lord would have taken up his place, in a cave that's still there this day that you can go and visit. It's not a romantic place, especially when you think about the animals in there. And so there's Mary and Jesus in the manger. And as I was thinking about this, I also had this idea come to me about the difficulties of life, even the difficulties of Mary's life and Joseph's life. A few minutes of silence there, if you will, with Mary, looking on her child in this cave. And then the shepherds come. And and I don't want to insult the shepherds, but the shepherds were the lowest rung of society. The shepherds were not a well-respected class of people. The shepherds lived out in the field with the animals. And the shepherds come. And here's Mary. How many of you mothers here would want to give birth to your child in a cave where animals live? And lay your child into a trough as the place of his crib? How many of you think that's a first-class birth? No, Jesus was born into this poverty, and Mary is there experiencing this with Joseph. And I think about Joseph too. Is this best you can provide for your wife and child? And so we enter into that place, don't we? Or we should. But then here come the shepherds, and they tell the story of what? Of the angels and the glory of God. And there is this kind of beauty that comes into that difficult scene, isn't there? How many of you all, and again, I'm not asking for a pity party here for you to take with yourself, but everybody here knows about the difficulties of life, don't we? We all have experienced difficult circumstances and trials and tribulations. And so today, as we enter into the cave, as we enter into the scene, and the shepherds come, and there's Mary, and the shepherds tell what the angels have said about this child, and what does it say Mary did? And remember what the gospel said? She did what? She reflected on this in her heart. She reflected on this in her heart. On this day, when we celebrate Mary, the Mother of God, the church, I think, is calling on us to reflect on who Jesus is, even in the midst, not even in the midst, especially in the midst of life's difficulties and challenges. To reflect on who Jesus is and how he lived and what he embraced. The shepherds said what was told to them about the child, and all who heard it was amazed. And Mary kept these things, reflecting on them, pondering them in her heart. About a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I was in the back of the church shaking hands, as I do sometimes. And somebody walked up to me And they were familiar to me, but kind of only vaguely familiar to me, someone that I had seen before. And they just handed me a note. No words, no explanation, no nothing. Just handed it to me and walked off. And I'm like, what's in this, you know? I get happy notes and I get not happy notes, okay? And I was like, so what do we have here? And so I took that note and I brought it home and I opened it and I took out this letter. And it was a very kind letter. And it was a letter reflecting on last year's solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God, on New Year's Day. And the person wrote in the note, they said, Father Mike, I'm not a regular parishioner of yours. I only come to OLG on rare occasion. But I was in your church last year on New Year's Day. And you challenged me, you challenged everybody in the congregation to pray the rosary every day and ponder on the mystery of who Jesus is. And he said, I've been doing it every day for the past 10 months, and it has changed my life. That was a happy note, okay? And I was so grateful that he shared that with me. And I share that with you because as we begin a new year today, right? We have on our church calendar, Mary, the Mother of God. We have on our secular calendar, what? New Year's Day. Happy New Year. And we come together on this day, and I think it's providential that we have Mary pondering on who Jesus is, the message of the shepherds, this moment of poverty that they were living. And so as you begin your new year, I'm going to encourage you to make a resolution. If you make this resolution, I think you'll be able to keep your other resolutions. You know, the one to exercise and to eat better and to get your finances in order, and to contact your old friend, or to spend some more time with your family, to attend Mass more regularly, to read the Bible or other good books, right? I bet I got most of you on that list, didn't I? Okay? All right. So I got most of you. So you've made those resolutions. Let me give you a resolution that might help you with those, okay? How about that you just resolve to spend some time every day in silence? Maybe an hour in the morning and a half hour in the... No, not that much, okay? Maybe just a long pause in the morning before the crucifix. Just a pregnant pause where you stop your day and you look at the cross and you think about who Jesus is and what he did. That would be the minimum. But you make that resolution to ponder that who Jesus is with Mary. And maybe on the other side, you can say, I'll spend 20 minutes. I'll pray the rosary. How long does it take to pray the rosary? 17 minutes if I'm on a roll, okay? But maybe 20 minutes if I'm a little more prayerful, okay? So you pray the rosary every day and you ponder on who Jesus is with the Blessed Mother. But in any case, you find some time for silence. One long moment, maybe kneeling before the crucifix as you begin your day. Maybe it's to pray the rosary every day. I'm going to give you a little quote from Mother Teresa here. We cannot find God in noise or agitation. In nature, trees and flowers and grass, they all grow in silence. The stars and the moon and the sun, they all move in silence. What is essential is not what we say, but what God tells us, and what he tells us through others. In silence, he listens to us. In silence, he speaks to our souls. In silence, we are granted the privilege of listening to his voice. Silence our eyes, silence our ears, silence our mouths. In the silence of our hearts, God will speak. The silence of heart is necessary for you to hear God everywhere, in the closing of a door, in a person who needs you, in a bird that sings, in the flowers and in the animals. If we are careful in silence, it will be easy to pray. There is so much talk, so much repetition, so much telling of tales and words and writings. Our prayer life suffers because our hearts are not silent. End of quote. Mary kept all these things, pondering them in her heart, and I would add, in silence, right? So I challenge you, as we reflect on Mary in that difficult circumstance in the cave, pondering on who Jesus is in your life, whether in joyful circumstances or difficult circumstances, I ask you to spend some time pondering on who Jesus is. Maybe one long pause in the morning. Maybe you could commit yourself to praying the rosary every day. In any case, spend some time with Mary, the Mother of God, reflecting on who Jesus is.